The binder had already spoken the first oath over my wrists when the doors of the Accord Hall came open against the wind. I did not look up. I had taught myself not to look up at sounds anymore, because for 9 years every sound had been a door I hoped would open and never did, and a queen cannot stand at the front of her own surrender with hope on her face. So I kept my eyes on the contract spread across the long stone table, on the dark Vorex ink already drying in the first 3 clauses, and I let the binder's voice go on, folding the gray vow cord across the backs of my hands. By the concord struck at Hale's reach, he said, the line of Varen is joined to the line of oath, that the war between Theranai and Vorex be ended in blood shared instead of blood spilled. Beside me, Tarnoth shifted his weight, and I felt the heat of him the way you feel a forge through a wall. He was a broad man for his kind, plated in the burnished bronze his house wore to remind everyone that it had never been breached. His hand lay on the table near mine, and on his smallest finger he wore a ring cut from the melted hull of a Theranai evacuation ship, a trophy from the war he was now being paid to. Forgive. Continue, Tarnoth said. He had a low voice that he used like a man setting down something heavy on your foot. The queen is eager. I was not eager. I was 41 of my people's years old. I had buried a husband I never married and a mother who named me in secret, and I had run out of ways to refuse. The Vorex held the upper passes. They held the orbital lanes my grain ships needed. If I did not bind my house to Tarnoth by the turning of the third moon, his fleets would finish what they had started at the Sail Gate 9 years ago, and there would be no Theranai left to be queen of. The Concord was not a marriage. It was a knife held to the throat of a world, and I was the world. So when the doors opened and the wind came down the long hall and guttered the standing lamps, I did not look up. It was old Rael who looked up. I heard him before I understood him. My shield captain, gone gray and slow in the years since the war, posted at the door because he was too proud to be posted anywhere else and too loved to be told. I heard the bench scrape as he stood. I heard the wet catch of an old man's breath, and then I heard him say a single word. And the word was not a name and not a title and not a warning. The word was no. He said it the way you say it when something you have grieved walks back into the room, the binder faltered. Tarnoth turned his great plated head, and against my own teaching, against 9 years of discipline, I lifted my eyes from the contract and looked down the length of the Accord Hall to the open doors. A man stood in them, a human man. He was alone. He had come in from the rain, and it ran off him and pooled on the marble, and for a moment he was only a shape against the white daylight behind him, the way a thing you have prayed for is only a shape until it is real. Then he came forward into the lamplight, and I saw him, and the hall went on existing around me, but I was no longer in it. He was older. That was the first thing and the cruelest. 9 years had taken the man I remembered and weathered him down to something harder and quieter. Gray running through the dark of his hair, a scar split white through one brow and down to the jaw, a gauntness in the cheeks that spoke of years of not enough. His clothes were a traveler's, patched at the elbow and worn to the color of road. He walked with a hitch in his left leg that had not been there before. He looked like a man who had been a long time coming, but he carried himself the way only one man I had ever known carried himself, steady, spine like a held line, eyes that went around a room once and took its measure and gave nothing back. The Theranai have a saying about the way a soldier stands when he has decided he is already dead and is simply finishing the work, and Elias Marr had stood that way the last time I saw him at the mouth of the Sail Gate, with the Vorex coming down the snow and my people streaming past his shoulder to the ships. Elias, I said. I did not mean to say it aloud. The name came out of me the way water comes out of a cracked jar, all at once and without permission, and it landed in the silence of the Accord Hall and could not be taken back. Tarnoth's hand closed on the contract. Who, he said, is this? The human did not answer him. He came up the length of the hall, past the benches of the conquered witnesses, past the Vorex envoys in their bronze, past old Rael, who had sat back down hard and was staring at him with both hands pressed flat to his own chest as if to hold his heart inside it. He came until he stood at the foot of the dais on the far side of the long stone table, with the contract and the drying ink and the warlord between us. And then he reached into his coat, and the whole hall flinched, 100 hands going to 100 blades, and he took out a small thing closed in his fist, and he set it down on the dark Vorex ink without a word. It was a ring, plain iron, unornamented, the kind a poor soldier might wear, and a queen never would. It sat on the contract between the third clause and the fourth, small and dull and impossible, and I knew it the way you know your own pulse, because I had pressed it into this man's hand 9 years ago at the mouth of the gate and told him to bring it back to me. I told you I would, Elias Marr said. His voice was rougher than I remembered, sanded down by whatever years he had crossed to get here. It took longer than I said it would. I'm sorry for that. I could not speak. I am a queen of a people who prize composure above almost any virtue, who teach their children that the face is the last fortress and must never fall, and I sat at the front of my own forced wedding and felt the fortress go. Tarnoth picked up the ring. He held it between two thick fingers and turned it in the lamplight, and his mouth made the shape of a smile that had nothing of warmth in it. A trinket, he said. A beggar walks into a concord ceremony with a cold piece of iron, and the queen says a dead man's name. He set the ring down, not back on the contract, but to the side, dismissed. Throw him out, we will finish. Two of his bronze-plated men started forward from the wall. Stop, I said. It was not loud. I have learned that the orders that are obeyed are rarely the loud ones. The two Voriks halted and looked to their warlord, and Tarnoth's jaw tightened because in the Accord Hall, under the Concord's own roof, before the binding was sealed, I was still queen of the Theranai and the floor was still mine. That man, I said, held the cell gate. The words went out across the hall, and I watched them land. The witnesses on the Concord benches were not all young. Some of them had been alive 9 years ago. Some of them had children who had come down through the gate while a thin line of soldiers held the snow behind them, and they knew, every Theranai in that hall knew, what it had cost to hold the sailgate long enough for the last ships to rise. The sailgate fell, Tarnoth said. Everyone who held it died. That is a matter of record. Whoever this is, he is not the dead. The dead do not come asking favors. He has not asked for anything, I said. And it was true. Elias had set down the ring and said he was sorry he was late, and that was all. He had not asked me to stop the binding. He had not claimed me or named himself my husband or made any demand at all. He stood at the foot of the dais in his road-worn coat with the rain still dripping from him, and he looked at me with those steady eyes, and he waited. Not for me to choose him, I understood, but only to know that the thing he had carried for 9 years across whatever dark he had, crossed, had finally been set down where it belonged. That was the worst of it. That was the thing that broke the fortress all the way down. He had not come to take me back. He had come to give me back the ring because I had asked him to, and a human had decided that an old promise to a queen on a dying mountain was a thing worth 9 years of his life. Rael, I said, without taking my eyes from the man at the foot of the dais. Come here. My old shield captain rose again, slower this time, and came down the hall with his hand already out, and I saw that it was shaking. He stopped beside the human. He looked at the scar split white through the brow. He looked at the hitch in the left leg. He reached out and very carefully, the way you touch a thing you are afraid is not real, he turned back the worn left cuff of Elias Marmar's coat. On the inside of the forearm, burned into the skin in a line gone silver with age, was the mark the gate's signal fire had left on every soldier who fed it that last night to keep the beacon lit for the ships. I had seen that mark on a dozen bodies we recovered from the lower snow. I had never seen it on a living arm. Rael made a sound I will not try to write down. My queen, he said when he could. He did not look at me. He could not look away from the human. My queen, it's him. It's the gatekeeper. It's Mar. And then in a whisper that carried the length of that silent hall because there was nothing else in it to compete, he held the line. I saw him hold the line, and he's standing in this room. Tarnoth set both bronze fists on the contract and leaned his weight on them. This proves nothing, he said, but for the first time, the heavy thing in his voice had a crack running through it. A scar can be bought, a ring can be stolen. I will not have my concord undone by a ghost and a sentimental old soldier. Then ask him something, I said, that only he could answer. And I turned at last, fully toward the man I had buried 9 years before, the man I had worn the gray band for, the man who had walked back out of the dead and into my forced wedding with my own iron ring closed in his fist, and I made myself ready to learn whether he was real. Tarnoth straightened. If there was to be a question, he meant to be the one to ask it, and he meant it to be a trap. Very well, he said. The Queen's people love a story. Let us have one. You say you held the sail gate. Then tell us, Ghost, who gave the order to fire the pass? Who put the torch to the bridge charges and brought the whole upper road down on the Vorik's vanguard and killed 1,000 of my own kin in a single night? He smiled his cold smile. The records of that night are sealed. Only the dead know the answer. So tell me and tell me true, and I will know you for a liar. It was a clever cruelty. The destruction of the upper road was the single deed the Voriks had never forgiven and the Theranai had never claimed, because to claim it was to claim 500 of Tarnoth's dead, and no one wished to be the name written under that number. Whoever answered would mark themselves forever as the slaughterer of the pass. Elias Mar did not hesitate. I did, he said. The hall did not breathe. I gave the order, and I put the torch to it myself, because the charge runner was dead, and there was no one else left standing who could reach the plunger. He said it flatly, without pride and without flinching, the way a man states a thing he has carried alone for a long time and is almost relieved to set down in front of witnesses. Your vanguard had broken our left and they were inside the throat of the pass. If the bridge had held another quarter hour, they would have been over it and down onto the landing field, and they would have killed the ships on the ground with the children still climbing into them. So I brought the road down. I counted 4 ships still loading when I did it. I have counted them every night since. He looked at Tarnoth then, and there was no apology in it. But there was no triumph either. There was only the terrible plainness of a man who has done a thing and will not pretend he didn't. I am sorry for your debt, Elias said. I am not sorry I saved mine. I have sat through 1,000 sessions of the Concord. I have heard ambassadors lie with their whole bodies, and I have heard the rare true thing cut across a chamber like a dropped blade. This was the second kind. Every Theranai in that hall knew it because every Theranai in that hall had been told all their lives that the upper road had come down by Vorik's clumsiness, a charge mishandled by their own engineers, a story we had let them keep because the truth made a martyr of a dead human, and the Voriks do not abide their enemies having heroes. But the truth was that one of my soldiers had stood on a burning bridge with the enemy's boots already on the timbers and made the worst arithmetic a man can make, and had bought 4 ships of children with 500 lives and the rest of his own. And he was standing in my hall, having carried that arithmetic across 9 years to lay it at my feet with the ring. He's lying, Tarnoth said, but he said it too fast, and he said it to the room instead of to the man, which is what a person does, when he is no longer arguing with the truth, but with how many people have heard it. He is not, said a thin voice from the Concord benches. It was the archivist of the Reach, a tiny, ancient Theranai woman named Sen, who had kept these sealed war records for 30 years and feared nothing because she had already outlived everything she loved. She rose, gripping the back of the bench, and she lifted one trembling finger toward Elias Marr. The sealed account of the sail gate, she said, names the soldier who fired the pass only by his service mark because his body was never recovered, and the Concord ruled a man could not be honored or condemned without a body to lay the verdict on. The mark recorded in the sealed account is a human designation, 3 letters and 4 numerals. Her old eyes did not leave him. Soldier, speak your service mark. Elias told her, 3 letters, 4 numerals. His voice did not change. Sen closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet, and she did not bother to hide it because at her age the face is no longer a fortress, it is only a face. It is the mark in the sealed account, she said, witnessed and recorded. The man who fired the sail gate stands in this hall. The Concord's own record says so. She lowered her finger. I have kept that name in a sealed box for 9 years, soldier, waiting for a body to give it to. I never thought I would give it to the man himself. A sound moved through the Theranai benches then, not a cheer. We are not a cheering people, but a low collective exhalation, a settling like a held weight finally set down, one by one, without order. The old soldiers among the witnesses began to stand. Not for me, not for Tarnoth. For him, for the human who had held the gate and come back from the dead to say so. I watched them rise, and I understood that I had lost control of my own forced wedding, and I have never in my life been so glad to lose anything. But it was not enough. A service mark is a thing of record, and Tarnoth was a thing of force, and force does not bow to record unless record has more force behind it. I could see him gathering himself, his crack sealing over, his bronze certainty closing back around him. In a moment he would say that the Upper Road slaughter only proved this human was a war criminal who deserved the noose, that the Concord could not be founded on the freedom of the man who had butchered 500 Voriks in a night, that the binding must proceed precisely to bury this ghost back where he belonged. I could see the whole speech forming behind his teeth. And the terrible thing was that it would work because a peace built on a marriage is a peace someone wants, and the people who want it would rather have an executed ghost than a war. So before he could speak, I did the thing I had told him to do. I asked the man something only he could answer, but I did not ask it to test him. I asked it because I had to know with my own ears, in front of my own court, that the dead can come home. When you took the ring from me at the gate, I said, and my voice was not a queen's voice anymore, it was only a woman's. I told you to bring it back to me. And you said something. You said it low, so the others wouldn't hear, because it was not a thing a soldier says to a queen. I had to stop. I made myself go on. What did you say to me? Elias, what did you call me? He looked at me across the contract and the drying ink and the warlord, and for the first time since the doors had opened, something moved in the steadiness of his face. It was not weakness. It was the opposite of weakness. It was a man letting himself just once feel the size of the thing he had crossed. You'd given me your mother's ring, he said quietly, and your mother was the only one who ever called you by your child name, and you'd told me that name one night on the wall when we both thought we'd be dead by morning. So when you put the ring in my hand and told me to bring it back, I knew what you were really asking. You were asking me to come home to you. He drew a breath. So I said I would. I said, I'll bring it back, Sayla. I'll find my way back to you if I have to walk the whole dark to do it. Sayla. No one in that hall had heard that name in 9 years. No one in that hall but the dead and I had ever heard it at all. My mother had whispered it over my cradle and again on her deathbed, and between those two moments she had given it to no one, and I had given it to exactly one living soul. On a freezing rampart, in the last quiet hour before the Vorix came, to a human soldier I had no business loving and loved anyway. The widow's band on my wrist was gray silk gone soft with 9 years of wearing. I had tied it the day the Concord ruled Elias Marr dead without a body, and I had not untied it since. Through 2 failed regencies and a famine and the long, slow throttling that had ended with my hands bound in vow cord beside Tarnoth of the Vorix. I had worn my grief where my people could see it, because a queen's grief, like everything else about her, belongs to her people. I lifted my bound hands and I tore the band off and the vow cord tore with it. The binding, I said into the silence, is ended. Tarnoth moved faster than a man his size should be able to. He came around the table, and he caught the torn vow cord up off the marble where I had thrown it, and he held it out flat across both bronze palms, as though presenting evidence to the room. You see, he said. And now his voice had found its weight again, and he aimed it at the Concord benches where the brokers of the peace sat pale. You see what a ghost does. He walks in off the road, and a queen tears up a treaty that took 3 years in the lives of envoys to write. There are 900,000 Theranai who will starve when my grain lanes close. There are 6 border worlds that will burn when my fleets move. All of it, traded away for one human's love story. He let the cord fall. I came here in good faith. I came to end a war. And I will not be made a fool of in front of the Concord by a dead man and a sentimental queen. It was a good speech. It had the shape of reason, and reason is the most dangerous thing a powerful man can borrow. I saw the Concord brokers wavering, the Hales Reach delegation, the neutral arbiters, the soft, frightened faces of people who would do anything, sign anything, sell anyone, to avoid the war coming back. They were not evil. They were only afraid, and fear had carried this whole proceeding from the first day. Fear had bound my hands in cord. Fear would bind them again if I let it. You speak of good faith, I said. I do. Then let us speak of the sail gate, I said. Since the soldier has opened that grave, we may as well stand in it together. I came down off the dais. A queen does not come down off her dais. It is one of the oldest of our laws. The height of the throne is the height of the law itself. I came down anyway, and the breaking of that small rule made the hall go quiet in a new way. 9 years ago, your vanguard came down the snow onto a column of Theranai children and their mothers and the old and the sick, all of them climbing into evacuation ships on a landing field below the pass. Tell the Concord, warlord, since you treasure the record so, where were you that night? His jaw set. I commanded the eastern advance. You commanded the eastern advance? I agreed, which is to say you were 40 miles from the killing in a warm command ship, while your cousin Vaskoth led the vanguard into the throat of the gate. I let that sit. Your cousin, your rival. The one man in your house with a claim to stand against you. You sent Vaskoth up the sail gate at the head of the assault, and when the road came down it took him and his 500, and when the war ended it was you who came home to take his lands and his banners and his seat, and you who came here 9 years later to be paid in a queen's hand for the war that made you great. That is a vile thing to say, Tarnoth said very quietly. It is a vile thing to have done, I said. I had not known it, not for certain, not until the human spoke, and the records cracked open and the shape of that night rearranged itself in front of me. But I knew it now the way you know a thing once you have seen it. You cannot unsee it. Tarnoth had not lost 500 kin at the sail gate. He had spent them. He had sent his only rival up a mountain into a slaughter he could profit from either way, and the only thing that had gone wrong, from where he stood, was that a human soldier had brought the road down a quarter hour early and made the slaughter complete instead of letting his cousin claw back out of it with a victory. He's not angry that the road came down, I said, and now I was speaking to the Concord, to the frightened brokers, to the whole pale watching hall, and I pointed at the warlord without dropping my eyes from his. He is angry that it came down on his terms instead of mine. He is angry that the man who fired the pass is alive to be thanked, because a living hero of the sail gate is a thing his whole peace is built on burying. Look at him. He did not come here for peace. He came here to bury the last witness, and to take a crown for doing it. Lies, Tarnoth said. But the heavy thing in his voice was all cracked now, no certainty left in it, and the Vorix envoys behind him had gone still in the particular way of men who are beginning to wonder which side of a falling wall they are standing on. Then call your cousin, I said softly. Call Vaskoth to the Concord to deny it. Oh, but you cannot. He died on a mountain you sent him up. I turned from him because the most powerful thing you can do to a man who has built his life on being feared is to turn your back on him in a full hall and have nothing happen. Archivist, the deployment orders for the Eastern Front, the night of the gate. Are they sealed? They are, old Sen, but not from you, my queen. Sealed records open to the throne in matters of the throne's own war. Her thin mouth had set into something almost like a smile. I can have them brought within the hour. Vaskoth's deployment was countersigned. Whoever sent him up the gate set his own mark to it. He countersigned it, Elias said. I had almost forgotten he could speak. He had stood through all of it in his road-worn coat, silent at the foot of the dais, watching me take the hall apart the way he had once watched me hold it together. Now he spoke, and the whole room turned to the human again. I saw the orders, he said. Vaskoth showed me the day before the assault when he came up to scout the pass himself because he didn't trust the maps and he didn't trust the man who'd sent him. Elias's scarred mouth twisted. Soldiers talk even across a war. He showed me his own deployment order with his cousin's mark on it, and he said, I'll give it to you the way he said it. He said, my cousin has finally found a way to win whether I live or die. Then he went up the mountain and he did his duty and he died. And the man who sent him is standing in front of you in his dead kin's bronze, asking for a crown. The silence after that was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Tarnoth looked around his own ruin. He was not a stupid man. You do not climb over your own family by being stupid. He could feel the hall turning the way you feel a weather turning, the pressure dropping, the storm coming round. The Concord brokers would not sign now. They could not with the Eastern deployment orders an hour from being read aloud. Not with the Salegate's hero standing alive at the foot of the dais and the warlord's own cousin's last words ringing in the rafters. The peace built on my marriage was dead. And a man like Tarnoth, when the thing he has built begins to fall, does not stand in the rubble and reason. He reaches for the oldest tool he has. Then there will be no peace, he said. He drew himself up to his full-plated height, and the cold smile came back. And it was worse now because there was nothing behind it. I came in good faith, and I have been ambushed by a dead man and a faithless queen. My fleets stand off your grain lanes. By the time your archivist reads her little papers, my order will already be given. He turned for the doors. You wanted your ghost. Selah of the Theranai. Keep him. Bury your world with him. He had used the child name. He had heard it, and he had filed it away in the moment Elias spoke it. And now he spat it back at me to wound. And I understood, watching him stride for the doors with his bronze men closing around him, that the war I had spent 9 years trying to buy off with my own hands was about to come back down the snow, and that the only thing standing between my 900,000 and the dark was a torn treaty and a man who had already died once at a gate to save them. He did not reach the doors. At the threshold, Tarnoth stopped, and I saw his shoulders change, saw the rage cool into something colder and far worse, the look of a man who has remembered at the last moment that he is still holding a card. He turned back into the hall, and the cold smile came with him, and when he spoke, he did not speak to me. He spoke to the Concord brokers, to the legalists of Hale's Reach, in the careful, reasonable voice that had nearly bound my hands an hour before. Before I go, he said, let us be lawful. The Concord prizes its law, so let the law be served. He lifted one bronze finger toward Elias. That human is registered property of the Vorik state, labor mark, Corin Shipyard's 9th intake. He was taken at the sale gate, processed under our statutes, and held under bond for 9 years. He did not buy his freedom. He did not earn manumission. He fled. The smile widened. Under the very accords this Concord exists to uphold, the same accords that recognize my house's claims and my grain lanes and my standing here today, escaped chattel is returned to its registered holder on demand. I demand him. Hand me my property, and I will overlook the morning's insults, and the peace may yet stand. The hall, which had been turning so steadily toward the human, lurched, because it was lawful. That was the horror of it. The Concord was a thing of statutes, and the statutes had been written by frightened practical people to bind 100 warring worlds into something that would hold, and somewhere in their 1,000 clauses was the ugly old provision that property crosses borders and must be returned, because every signatory had property of one kind or another, and none of them wished to lose it. The brokers of Hale's Reach went pale and began, God help them, to confer. I saw a clerk reach for the statute rolls. I saw a neutral arbiter mouth the word jurisdiction. The man who had brought a warlord's empire to its knees with the truth could be dragged back to a quarry by a footnote, and the people who would do it were not cruel, they were only lawful. And lawful is how the worst things in the galaxy have always been done. You will not, I said, and my voice cracked across the hall, touch him. It is not for you to say, Queen of the Theranai, Tarnoth said, almost gently. It is for the Concord. He stands on neutral ground, under neutral law. Your throne does not reach the floor of this hall. You said as much yourself when you stepped down off your dais. So step further down. Beg the Concord, if you like. But the statute is the statute. 2 of his bronze men were already moving along the wall, unhurried, toward the pillar where Elias stood, and the human did not run, because a man who has lived 9 years as property knows exactly how far running gets. You. Archivist, I said, desperate now, and I did not bother to hide the desperation. The statute. Is there nothing? But it was not Sen who answered. It was Lord Korth, the scarred old Voryx, Vaskoth's blood, who had not yet thrown down his gorget, who was at that moment still a sworn man of the House of Oth. He stepped out in front of his warlord, into the path of the bronze men, and he spoke in the trade tongue so the whole hall would understand him, and his voice shook with something that had been 9 years coming. The statute returns chattel to its registered holder, Korth said. I keep the muster rolls of the border houses. I know the Corran registry. The 9th intake at Corran was not registered to Tarnoth. He turned to face the man he had served. It was registered to the Eastern Command, to Vaskoth. Every soul taken at the Sail Gate was processed under your cousin's seal, because your cousin held that front, the front you sent him to die on. This human is not your property, warlord. By your own law, by the registry's own ink, he was Vaskoth's, and Vaskoth is dead by your hand. The silence that followed was the silence of a trap closing on the man who said it. So claim him if you like, Korth went on, and now his old voice was terrible. Stand before the Concord and demand the return of your cousin's property. The cousin whose death made you great, whose bronze you wear, whose name you spent. Tell the law that this man belongs to Vaskoth's estate, and then tell it who holds that estate now, and how he came to hold it. He reached up then and unclasped the gorget at his own throat, and let it fall ringing onto the marble, the first of the gorgets, the one that started the others. I am of Vaskoth's blood. If this human is anyone's property under your law, he is mine by inheritance of the estate you stole, and I free him here now. Witnessed by the Concord. Let the registry show it. The bronze men stopped where they stood. I have spent my life among people who fear the law and people who use it, and I had never until that moment seen the law turned in a man's hand like a blade and laid back against his own throat. Tarnoth had reached for the one weapon that could not be argued with, and an old soldier of his own house had picked it up by the other end. The slave claim was dead. Worse than dead, it had become in the space of a breath the public proof of everything I had accused him of, spoken not by his enemy but by his own blood, on the floor of the Concord, into the permanent record. For the first time, Tarnoth had nothing to say at all. And into that nothing, quiet as a key turning, the human finally spoke. Tarnoth, Elias said the name quietly. Into the silence the fallen gorget had made, and the warlord turned toward him the way a man turns toward the last bad thing in a long bad day. The human came forward then, past me, up the length of the hall, and he did not stop a respectful distance away the way my own people would have. He walked right up to the bronze, close enough that the 2 Voryx guards swung their long axes down to bar him, and he stood against the crossed blades with the reins still in his hair and looked into the face of the man who had owned his last 9 years. You don't recognize me, Elias said. Why would you? I was a number to you, the same as your cousin was a number. But I know you, warlord. I know the inside of your war the way you never will, because you watched it from a warm ship and I lived in its gut. He tilted his head. After the gate, when the road came down, it didn't kill me clean. Your people pulled me out of the snow half dead, and they didn't waste a hero on a wall. They put me in the labor camps at Dreth, and then the shipyards at Corran, and then the border quarries. 9 years of being passed down the line of your empire like a coin nobody wanted to spend. I built the very fleets you're threatening this queen with. I know how many of them are real. Tarnoth said nothing. But his men did not lower the axes either, and that stillness was its own answer. 3 squadrons, Elias said. You have 3 squadrons that can fight. The rest is hulls with skeleton crews and recruits who've never burned anything but fuel, painted up bright and flown in close formation so they look like a wall from a distance. I welded the patches on half of them. Your grain blockade is a bluff held together by reputation and old fear, and the only reason it's worked this long is that no one on this side of the line ever got close enough to count. He let that settle into the Concord benches, where the brokers who had been ready to sell me to avoid a war were now leaning forward, recalculating. You're not strong enough to bury this world. You never were. You're strong enough to bluff a frightened Concord into handing you a queen, and that's all you've ever been strong enough to do. You are a liar and a slave, Tarnoth said. I'm a slave who came home, Elias said. That's the part you can't bluff your way past. Then he did the thing I will remember to the end of my days. He turned from the warlord, and he faced a cluster of Voryx envoys who still stood sworn behind him, 5 of them now, since old Korth had already cast his gorget to the floor, plated in the duller bronze of lesser houses, the small lords and seconds who fill out a great man's retinue, and he spoke to them, not in the trade tongue of the Concord. In Voryx, their own harsh consonantal tongue, learned across 9 years in their camps, spoken in their own cadence. And I watched the envoy's faces open in shock to hear it in a human mouth. I do not have all the words he said. I learned them later from Rael, who had spent the war on that border and knew enough to follow. But I know the shape of it, because I watched it work on their faces the way water works on a dam. He told them whose orders had sent Vaskoth up the gate. He named the countersign. He told them that the man they served had spent his own cousin, their cousin, for two of those who remained were of Vaskoth's blood, to win a war from a warm ship, and had come to a foreign hall to be paid for it in a foreign queen. He told them he had stood beside Vaskoth on the mountain and heard his last words, and he gave the words to them in their own tongue, the way a man hands back something stolen. And then he told them, last, the thing that I think no Theranai could have made them believe, because we were their enemy and he was only their slave. He told them that the children had reached the ships. 4 transports, Rael translated for me, low, his old voice cracking. He's telling them 4 transports got off the field that night. He's telling them the road he brought down, the one that killed their kin, it bought 4 ships of children, and every one of those children is grown now, alive, because Vaskoth's death meant something even if his cousin made it mean nothing. He's telling them their dead weren't spent for a warlord's crown. He's telling them their dead bought a future, and that the man who's standing here in their cousin's bronze is the only one in this room who'd rather they never knew it. The first to move was a younger envoy of Vaskoth's blood, kin who had stood silent at Korth's shoulder through all of it. He looked from the human to the warlord, and then he reached up and unclasped the bronze gorget at his throat, the piece that bound a sworn man to his lord's house, and he let it fall ringing onto the marble beside the old captain's. Then the second of Vaskoth's blood did the same. Then a third, who was no kin at all, only a soldier who had heard enough. Tarnoth watched his retinue come apart on the floor of a foreign hall, and for the first time the fear he had spent his life putting into other faces moved across his own. A warlord is not his fleets. A warlord is the belief of the men who fly them, and Elias Mar had reached into the gut of his empire, the place he had been kept all those years, the place Tarnoth never thought to look, and pulled the belief out of it with both hands. "Give the order if you want," Elias said, in the trade tongue now so all of us could hear. "Open your channel and tell your 3 real squadrons to burn a world full of children to cover for a kinslayer. See how many captains you have left when the rest of the fleet hears why." He stepped back from the crossed axes, and the guards, uncertain now, let him. "Or go home, warlord, and live out your years being exactly as feared as you actually are. Which I'd guess, once this hall empties, is not very." The doors of the Accord Hall stood open behind Tarnoth, the gray daylight and the rain beyond them. He looked at the fallen gorgets. He looked at the conquered brokers who would not meet his eyes now, who were already turning their frightened arithmetic toward the new shape of the room. He looked at me, and at the torn band of my widowhood lying on the marble between us, and last of all he looked at the human, and there was murder in it, the clean, simple murder of a man who has lost everything and would like to take one thing down with him. I saw his hand drop toward the short blade at his hip. I did not see Rael move, but old soldiers are faster than they look when it is the only thing left in the world they remember how to do, and there was suddenly a shield captain's blade laid flat across the warlord's bronze wrist, not cutting, only resting, the way you rest a thing to remind a man it is there. "Not in the Accord Hall, my lord of the Vorics," Rael said pleasantly. "There are rules, even for ghosts." For a long moment nothing in the hall breathed. Then Tarnoth took his hand from his blade and turned, and walked out into the rain alone, without his retinue, without his bride, without his peace, with nothing at all but the bronze of a cousin he had murdered. And even that, I thought, watching him go, would feel heavier on him now than it ever had before. The doors swung shut behind him, and the wind died, and the lamp stood straight again. And I was standing in the middle of my own hall. The conquered did what frightened, practical people do when the thing they feared turns out to be smaller than they believed. It began very quickly to behave as though it had never been frightened at all. The brokers of Hale's Reach were on their feet before the doors had finished closing, talking over one another, and the shape of their talk had already turned. An hour ago they had been ready to fold my hands into a kinslayer's because his fleets seemed too large to refuse. Now the fleets were 3 real squadrons and a great deal of paint. The kinslayer was walking out into the rain alone, and 2 of his own cousins' blood had thrown their gorgets on our floor. So the brokers discovered, all at once, a deep and sudden commitment to justice. I let them. A queen learns when to make a thing happen and when to stand back and let frightened men race each other toward the outcome she wanted all along. By the time old Sen's clerks brought up the sealed Eastern deployment orders and read Vaskoth's countersigned death into the record of the Concord, the room had already decided which way history was going to run, and the reading only gave it the dignity of paper. The defected Voryx lords were the ones who mattered. The old scarred one, his name was Korth, of Vaskoth's house, stood where his gorget had fallen and spoke for a long time in the harsh, beautiful cadence of his tongue, and the trade clerk struggled to keep up, and the gist of it was this, that the houses of the Voryx border, the ones who had bled most in the war and gained least from it, had never loved Tarnoth, had only feared him, and that a warlord revealed as a kinslayer in a foreign hall could not hold them. Korth offered there, in front of the whole Concord, to carry the truth of the Sailgate back across the line himself, not to make war, to unmake a warlord. And he asked one thing in exchange. He asks, the clerk translated, faltering, that the records show what the humans said, that the 4 transports got off the field. He says the border houses have grieved the gate for 9 years, believing their dead bought nothing but a road of corpses. He says you cannot give a soldier back his life, but you can give him back the meaning of his death. The clerk swallowed. He asked that the names of the 4 transports be sent across the line, so that the Voryx who lost kin at the gate may know that children rode out on them. I looked at this enemy lord, this man whose blood my people had killed on a mountain, asking me for the names of the ships his cousin had died to save, and I understood that the war I had spent 9 years trying to end with a marriage had just been ended by a truth instead, and that the truth had been carried into the hall in a human's coat. Sen, I said, find the transport names. Find the manifests if they survived. If you can, the names of the children who rode them, and where they are now. My voice was steadier than I had any right to expect. Lord Korth will carry them home, and he will carry this from the Queen of the Theranai as well, that we grieved your dead too. We let your people believe a lie about the gate for 9 years, because the truth made a hero of our enemy's slave. That was a small thing to do with a large grief, and I am ashamed of it. The record will show that also. Korth listened to the translation, and then he did a thing the Voryx do not do for foreigners and almost never do for queens. He went down on one knee briefly, the bronze of his greave ringing on the marble. Not in submission, the clerk hurried to explain, but in the oldest of their gestures, the one a soldier makes at a comrade's cairn. He made it to me, and then rising he turned and made it again deeper, to the human standing silent at the side of the hall. That was when I noticed that Elias had stepped back. While the Concord remade the future and the Voryx lords swore their new oaths, and my own court came back to life around me, the man who had set all of it in motion had quietly withdrawn to the edge of the hall, to the shadow of a pillar near the doors, and stood there with his hands at his sides and the rain drying in his clothes, watching it happen the way a man watches a thing he is not part of. He had brought the ring back. He had pulled a warlord's empire apart with the truth, and now, as almost done, he was making himself small again, the way a soldier does when the work is finished and he is not sure he is allowed to still be in the room. I knew that posture. I had spent 9 years trying to forget it and never managed. It was the way he had stood at the mouth of the gate when I tried to order him onto the last ship and he refused, that careful, unassuming stillness of a man who has decided he is only worth what he can do for you and nothing more. I crossed the hall to him. The Concord's noise fell away behind me. My court watched their queen walk the length of her own hall a second time that day off her days toward a human in a road-worn coat, and I did not care what any of them thought, which was itself a kind of freedom I had not felt in 9 years. You're standing by the door, I said. Habit, he said. A man in my position learns to know where the door is. Your position. I stopped in front of him. Up close, the 9 years were worse, and they were also, somehow dearer, every gray hair and every hard line a thing he had carried across the dark, to bring back to me. And what is your position, Elias Marr? He looked at me, and for the first time the steadiness wavered, and underneath it I saw the thing he had been holding behind it since the doors opened. Not triumph, not even relief, but a fear so old and so deep it had become a part of how he stood. I came to give you the ring, he said quietly. That's all I came for. I want to be clear about that. Before anybody in this hall gets the wrong idea, before you have to manage it. His jaw worked. You were a princess of a great house when I knew you. You're a queen now, and I'm a man who spent 9 years in your enemy's quarries, who limps, and who killed 500 people on a bridge. I didn't walk all this way to stand in front of your whole court and ask you to take that on. I made you a promise on a wall once, and I keep my promises, and the promise was to bring the ring home. It's home. That's the promise. You don't owe me anything past that. You don't owe me anything at all. He had thought about this. I could hear that he had thought about it for a long time, across a long dark, the exact words a slave rehearses for the moment he stands in front of the thing he loves and gives it the chance to send him away cleanly, with both their dignities intact. It was the most human thing I had ever heard, and I had loved humans, one human, for 9 years. Elias, I said. Be quiet a moment. He went quiet. I reached down and took his left hand, The scarred one, the one that had held the torch on the bridge, the one I had pressed my mother's ring into on a freezing mountain a lifetime ago. And I turned it over, and I looked at the gate mark burned silver into the inside of his wrist, the mark old Sen had wept to see on a living arm. You think, I said, that you came here to give something back and then leave. You have it exactly backwards, the way you always did. I closed his hand in both of mine. I didn't give you my mother's ring as a keepsake to return. I gave it to you because among my people, on the night before a battle you don't expect to survive, you put your house's ring in the hand of the one you'd have married if the world had let. You knew that. You've known it for 9 years. That's why you kept it, and that's why you crossed an empire to bring it back. Not because I asked you to fetch a piece of iron, but because you couldn't bear to die out there with my whole heart in your pocket and never get to put it back in my hands yourself. His eyes were wet now. He did not look away, and he did not let the tears fall, and a queen of the Theranai knows exactly how much it costs a proud man to do both at once. So no, I said. You don't get to give the ring back and walk out the door. The ring was never the thing I wanted home. I took him out of the hall before the court could turn him into a monument. That is what courts do. I have watched mine do it all my life. Give them a living man who did an impossible thing, and within the hour they will have polished him into a statue, smooth and safe and dead. And Elias had spent 9 years being ground down by other people's uses of him, and I would not let my own people do it to him in his first hour home. So I took him up the worn private stair behind the dais, the one only the throne may use, and I brought him out onto the high stone terrace above the city, where the rain had passed and the late daylight was breaking gold under the edge of the clouds. And I shut the door on the Concord and the clerks and the whole machinery of being a queen. For a while neither of us said anything. He stood at the parapet and looked out over the Theranai capital, the white terraces falling away to the harbor, the evacuation memorials black against the gold, the thousand thin threads of smoke from a city that was, against every odd, still alive. I watched him look at it. I watched him count it, the way he had counted the transports, the way he counted everything. They got off the field, he said at last, quietly, to the city more than to me. I knew 4 did, I counted 4, but I didn't, across all of it, I never let myself really believe there'd be a city still standing on the other side. You hold a number in your head for 9 years, 4 ships, and it's just a number you tell yourself to keep going. And then you come over the last hill and there's a whole world of them. His voice was not quite steady. There are people down there who don't know my name and never will, and they're alive, and that's the thing I'll take with me, whatever happens now. Tell me, I said, 9 years. Tell me what it took. He was quiet so long I thought he would not. Then he told me, not all of it, I think no one ever tells all of it, but enough. The snow that should have killed him and didn't. The Vorix field surgeons who set his leg wrong on purpose and laughed about it. Dreth, where the cold got into the broken bone and never fully left. The shipyards at Coron, the welding, the years of building the very fleets that would one day be flown to my door. The quarries last, when his leg made him useless for finer work. The slow grinding stone years where men went into the dark and did not come out, and no one above ground ever learned their names. He told it flatly, in a soldier's accounting, no drama in it, and the lack of drama was the worst part, because you do not learn to tell a horror that plainly unless you have had a very long time to practice. How, I said. How did you keep walking? 9 years, Elias. Men break in 9 days. I had the ring, he said simply, and I had your name, 2 things they couldn't take, because they didn't know I had them. He turned from the city and looked at me. Every camp, every quarter, the first thing I did was find the one wall the guards couldn't see, and I'd scratch a mark in it. 1 mark for every day. Not to count the days, to leave a record, in case I didn't make it, that someone had been there who was trying to get back to somewhere. And every night I'd say the name, Selah, out loud if I could, in my head if I couldn't, to keep it real. Because I knew that if I ever forgot how to say it, I'd forget what I was walking toward, and a man who's forgotten what he's walking toward just lies down. I had been queen of the Theranai for 9 years. I had buried my mother and held a famine off my people by halves, and sold my own hands to a kinslayer to keep the dark from coming down the snow. I had been called wise and cold and strong and necessary, and I had stopped a long time ago expecting anyone to ask me how I had kept walking. I'll tell you mine, I said, because he had given me his, and a gift like that asks for one in return. When the Concord ruled you dead without a body, I tied this band on. I lifted my wrist, where the torn gray silk had been an hour ago and was not now. And the court thought it was grief, and it was, but it was also a lie, I told them, because the truth was I didn't believe it. Not for 1 day in 9 years. A queen cannot say to her famished, frightened people, your soldier's dead, but I have decided to keep hoping for the human. So I let them think the band was mourning. But every morning when I tied it, I was really saying, not yet, he's not back yet. and every night I untied it I was saying, but he could be, tomorrow. My own composure was going and I let it. I wore my hope as grief for 9 years because hope was the one thing I wasn't allowed to be seen having. So don't you dare stand on my terrace and tell me you crossed an empire on a name. I crossed 9 years on a knot of gray silk, and I crossed them towards you. And we are not going to stand here pretending either of us did it for a piece of iron. He crossed the space between us then, the careful man, and he stopped just short of me the way he always had, leaving the last step for me to take or not take, because even now, even here, he would not presume. You're a queen, he said. It was the last of his fear, the one true obstacle left, laid down plainly between us. I'm a man with a ruined leg and 100,000 miles of someone else's empire on my back. Your court will never sail, they'll never let you. A queen and her dead guard's ghost, there's no shape for it. There's no law that makes a place for me beside you. Then I'll make one, I said. I am very good at making laws. I made my own court rise off its benches today by walking down off my dais, which is also against the law, and the sky did not fall. I closed the last step myself. I did not press my brow to his, the way the songs would have it, the easy gesture. Instead, I lifted his scarred left hand again, and I held it open between us, and with my other hand I worked my mother's iron ring off the contract, where it had sat all this time. I had taken it up when I came down off the dais. I had been holding it in my fist through all of it without knowing, and I did not give it back to him. I put it on. I slid my mother's plain iron ring onto my own hand in front of him, in the gold of the breaking light, and I closed my fingers, and I said, there, now it's home, and so are you, and there's the shape of it. The queen of the Theranai wears a soldier's ring and dares her court to find a law against it. Let them try, he laughed, a cracked, disbelieving, broken open sound. The laugh of a man who has not laughed in a very long time and had forgotten he could. And the last of the careful stillness went out of him at last. 9 years of it, all at once, and he put his weathered forehead down, not against mine, but against our joined hands, against the iron, and his shoulders shook once, and I held the back of his gray head with my free hand the way you hold something you have finally got back, and below us the gold light came all the way under the clouds and lit the whole living city on fire. The peace that came was not the peace they had tried to bind me into. It was a better one, and it cost no one a marriage. Lord Korth went home across the line with the transport names and the truth of the gate, and within a month the word came back to us, carried on a Vorix courier ship that flew under a parley banner my people had not seen in 9 years. The border houses had risen, not in war, in refusal. They had simply stopped obeying Tarnoth, house by house, the way a rope stops being a rope once the first strands part. The grain blockade dissolved because the captains holding it discovered, all at once, that they had never been ordered there by anyone they were willing to die for. The 3 real squadrons stood down because 3 squadrons cannot hold an empire that has decided it no longer believes in the man at the top of it. Tarnoth was not killed. The Vorix Korth sent word, do not kill a kinslayer, they unname him. They took his cousin's bronze, and they took his houses, and they took the very sound of his name out of their records, and they left him alive to be no one, which I am told their poets consider the heavier sentence. I do not know if they are right, but I know that no fleet ever came down my snow again, and that the children of the sail gate grew up in a city the warlord never burned, and I have decided that is enough justice for me to carry. But the peace is not the thing I climbed all these stairs to tell you. The thing I climbed them to tell you happened first, the very next day, in the great square below the palace, and it was not arranged by the Concord or by me. It arranged itself the way the truest things do. I had meant to present Elias quietly. I had learned my lesson about courts and monuments, but word does not stay quiet in a city that has spent 9 years grieving its gate, and by the morning after the broken binding, the square below the palace had filled. Not summoned, just filled, the way water finds a low place. With Theranai, who had heard that the man who fired the pass had come back from the dead. They did not know his face. Most of them had been children themselves 9 years ago, or had not yet been born. They knew only the story, the road that came down, the 4 ships that rose, and they came to see the shape of it made flesh. I brought him out onto the low gallery above the square in a plain coat, because he would not be put in finery, and I would not make him. I had no speech prepared. I am a maker of speeches, and I had none. I stood at the rail beside a limping human in a borrowed coat, above a sea of my people, and I found I did not know how to begin to give him to them. It was a young woman who began it for me. She was perhaps 11 of our years old when the gate fell. She was a grown woman now, standing near the front of the square with a child of her own on her hip, and she was staring up at Elias with a look I have spent my life learning to read on faces and had never once seen aimed at a human. She was not cheering. She had gone white and still, and her free hand had risen to her mouth, and over the murmur of the whole square I heard her say one word, and then say it again louder until it carried. Transport 3, she said. I was on Transport 3. And then, to the people around her, to the whole square, with the tears running openly down a face that had clearly decided the fortress could fall today, I was on Transport 3. My mother carried me up the ramp in the dark, and there was fire on the mountain behind us. And she told me a soldier was holding the road so we could go, that as long as we could see the fire on the pass, it meant he was still alive up there, keeping it lit. We watched the fire the whole way up. My mother told me to remember it. She said, "That's a person dying so you can live, and you will not waste it." Her voice broke and held. I named my son for the fire. I named him Beacon, and I never had anyone to thank because they said the soldier died. She lifted the child on her hip toward the gallery, toward the human at the rail, the oldest offering there is. He didn't die. He's standing right there. That's him. That's the fire. I have heard a great many sounds in the Accord Hall and the war camps and the throne room. I have never heard a sound like the one that went through that square. It started near her and it spread the way fire spreads on a pass. One voice, then a dozen, then 1,000, not a cheer. The Theranai do not cheer, but something older and lower and far more terrible to stand inside of. The sound of a whole people recognizing all at once that the thing they had grieved as a loss was actually a gift, and that the giver was alive in front of them. Hands rose all across the square, the old gesture, the cairn gesture, the one Lord Korth had made on the marble. Thousands of them, a whole city's worth, made not to me their queen, but to a human soldier who limped. And Elias Mar, who had crossed an empire without bending, who had laid a warlord's fraud bare without raising his voice, who had stood by the door of my hall trying to make himself small, Elias broke. He gripped the rail with both scarred hands, and he bowed his head and his shoulders shook, and I did not touch him, because some things a man must be allowed to receive standing on his own feet. I only stood beside him, close, and let him be seen. 9 years of dark, of being a number, of welding other men's wars and dying by inches in a quarry where no one would ever know his name, and his name was in 10,000 Theranai mouths at once, and a woman had named her child for the fire he kept. And the people he had counted on a burning bridge were lifting their living children up toward him in the gold morning light. "They're thanking you," I said low, only for him. "I know," he managed. "I can't sail, I don't know how to take it." "You don't take it," I said. "You just let it land. You've taken everything alone for 9 years. This one you let them give you." He lifted his head then, and he looked out over the square, over the lifted hands, over the woman from Transport 3 and her son named Beacon, over the whole impossible living city he had brought down a mountain to save and never expected to see. And slowly, the careful soldier, he lifted his own scarred hand in return, not in salute, in the cairn gesture. He gave them back their own oldest sign, the human in a borrowed coat answering a city in the tongue of its grief, and the sound that rose then was the one I will hear on my deathbed. Later, that night, when the square had emptied and the lamps were lit and the two of us were alone again on the high terrace, he asked me a question. "The woman," he said, "Transport 3. Is there a way to know? The 4 manifests, the children." He could not quite finish it. "Sen has them," I said. "Every name we could recover. Where they are now, the ones we could trace." I had thought about this in the small hours, knowing he would ask. "You counted 4 ships every night for 9 years, Elias. Now you can count them by name. Every one of them grew up. You can know, for the rest of your life, exactly who is alive because of the worst arithmetic a man ever had to do." I took his hand. "I think that is the only thing in this world that could ever balance the 500, not forgetting them. Knowing the others by name until you die." He was quiet a long time, then he said, "Yes, I'd like to know their names," and after another while, lower. "Thank you for not letting me leave. I am a queen," I said. "I do not let valuable things walk out my door," he almost smiled. "Is that what I am? Valuable." "You held the gate," I said. "You crossed an empire. You brought my heart home in your pocket, and you tried to give it back at the door, like a borrowed coat." I turned his scarred hand over and laid it flat against the place over my heart, where a queen keeps the things that are hers. Valuable does not begin to cover it, but it will do until I think of a law that does. It would be a clean story to tell you that the city's love settled the matter, and that a queen and her soldiers simply walked into their ending. But a city is not a court, and the people who lift their children in a square are not the people who hold the seats, and the people who hold the seats had been quiet for exactly as long as it took them to recover from their fright. The trouble came, as it always does, dressed as concern. It was High Steward Verrill who brought it, 10 days on in the small council chamber, with the senior houses arranged behind him in a careful crescent that told me they had met about this before they brought it to me. Verrill was not a cruel man. He had served my mother. He had held the treasury through the famine without once putting his own house first, which is rarer than virtue. He believed sincerely that he was saving me from a mistake. "The people are grateful to the human," he said. as they should be. Let him be honored, my queen. Give him lands, a title, a place at every feast, his name in the gate roll in gold. The throne will lead the gratitude. No one in this room would deny him that. He folded his hands, but gratitude is not a consort. You are the last of the line of Varenne. The succession is not a private matter. It is the spine of the peace we have just won. To bind the throne itself to a foreign soldier, a man of a species we cannot even be certain can give the line an heir. That is not love, my queen. With respect. That is a wound to the state dressed as a love story. The houses behind him did not speak, but they did not need to. They had sent their most decent man to say the cruelest thing kindly, which is the oldest move in any court, and it had teeth precisely because Varel meant it well. You've thought about this a great deal, I said. We have thought of nothing else for 10 days. And in 10 days of thinking, did any of you think to ask the human what he wants? That stopped them. It had not occurred to them. To the court, Elias was a problem to be managed or a hero to be honored, a thing the throne would do something with, and it had not crossed a single noble mind in that careful crescent that the man might have a will of his own about it. Send for him, I said. He came. He stood in the small chamber in front of the senior houses of the Theranai, in the plain clothes he still preferred, and he listened to Varel lay it all out again. The succession, the spine of the peace, the wound to the state. And his face gave nothing back, the old soldier's stillness, and when the steward had finished, Elias was quiet for a moment, and then he said a thing that undid them more thoroughly than any speech I could have made. He's right, Elias said. The chamber went still. About the state, he's right, Elias went on. I've spent 9 years inside an empire that put a man at the top who was a wound to it, and I watched it rot from the throne down, and I would not wish that on this world for anything. If me standing beside the queen weakens the line, or splits these houses, or gives the Vorix border lords a reason to think the peace is soft, then the steward is right, and I won't be the crack the next warlord walks through. He looked at me, and there was apology in it, and there was also that terrible plainness he could never quite put down. I didn't cross all that to make this world less safe than I found it. I'd sooner be the honored guest at the bottom of every feast for the rest of my life than be the thing that brings the snow back down. Varel's careful crescent relaxed just slightly. They thought they had won. They thought the human had handed it to them, but, Elias said, and the chamber tightened again, since the steward's being honest, I'll be honest back. You're worried about an heir and about a foreign soldier sitting where a king should. I understand it. So let me take the second one off the table right now. He turned to face the houses fully. I don't want a throne. I've seen what thrones do to the men who reach for them. I'll take no title that lets me sit, no land that lets me command, no place in the line of succession at all. Whatever law you write it so I can never be king. I mean that. Bind my hands with it. I'd rather you trust me because I'm chained out of power than fear me because I might reach for it. He let that land. As for the heir, the line of Varenne is your spine, you said. Then guard the spine however your law requires. Adopt the blood, name a cousin. Do what your people have always done when a line needs carrying. I'm not asking to change one stone of how this world makes its kings. I'm asking for exactly one thing, and it isn't a crown. And what, said Varel more carefully now, is the one thing? To stand next to her, Elias said simply. Not above her, not behind the throne pulling at it. Beside her, with no power of my own, for as long as she'll have me, that's the whole of it. You can keep your succession and your spine and your law. I just want the place no law cares about, the one next to her at the end of the day, when the crown comes off. I have watched the senior houses of the Theranai argue a famine, a war, and the price of grain down to the last measure. I have never watched them sit in complete silence because a man had asked them for less than they were prepared to fight him for. They had come braced to deny a soldier a crown, and he had refused the crown before they could, and asked instead for the one thing no spine of state could possibly be wounded by, a place beside the queen with no power attached to it at all. It was, I understood, the most powerful thing he could have done, and he had done it by giving everything away, which is the only kind of power I have ever fully trusted. Steward, I said into the silence, draft it. A law that bars the human consort from the throne, the succession, and all command in perpetuity by his own request and the throne's consent. Make it ironclad. Make it so no future steward can ever fear him. I let the corner of my mouth move, and then draft the other half. That the queen of the Theranai may keep at her side, openly and honored, the man who held the sail gate, and that any house which finds this a wound to the state may bring its objection to the square below the palace and explain it to the woman who named her son Beacon. Varel looked at me for a long moment. Then slowly the old man who had served my mother inclined his head, and there was something in his face that I think was relief that the thing he had been sent to prevent had turned out, under the light, to be no threat at all, only two people and a place no law owned. It will be drafted by morning, my queen, he said, and then to Elias, with the stiff courtesy of a man revising a lifetime of assumptions in a single afternoon. You refused a crown in front of the senior houses of the Theranai soldier. Do you know how few men in our whole history have done that? I've wanted exactly one thing for 9 years, Elias said. A crown was never going to be in the way of it. That night I found him not on the terrace but down in the lower city, alone, at the Gate Memorial, the long black wall where we carved the names of the Salegate's dead. He was standing in front of the section where his own name had been, for 9 years, among the fallen, with a small mark beside it noting no body recovered. Someone had already struck a line through it, gently and carved beneath, returned. He was not looking at his own name. He was looking at the 500 Vorix names that are not on our wall, that will never be on our wall, that he carries instead. I came and stood beside him in the dark and did not speak. I'm going to spend the rest of my life, he said finally, being thanked for the 4 ships. And every time they thank me, I'm going to think about the bridge. He didn't look away from the wall. I don't want you to fix that. I just want you to know it's there. You're not getting a hero, Selah. You're getting a man who did arithmetic on a burning bridge and will hear the answer every day until he dies. If you want to make a place for me beside you, that's what stands in it. I know exactly what I'm getting, I said. I've known since the doors opened. I took his arm. Come home. The wall will still be here in the morning. The dead don't need you to stand guard over them anymore, Elias. You did that for 9 years. Come home and let me stand watch with you instead. We were joined at the turning of the 3rd moon, the same moon by which I was to have been bound to Tarnoth, which was either an accident of the calendar or my own quiet stubbornness. I have never decided which. It was nothing like the binding in the Accord Hall. There was no contract, no Vorix ink, no vow cord folded over my wrists by a stranger reciting clauses about blood shared instead of blood spilled. The Theranai have an older rite than the Concords, one we keep for the joinings we choose rather than the ones we sign, and it asks for almost nothing. No oaths a court can hold you to, no exchange a treasury can value. It asks only that you stand in the open before the people who will have to live with your choice, and that you each say, in your own words, the true thing, and that the people answer. We did not do it in the throne room. I had had enough of that room and its laws for one lifetime. We did it in the square where the woman from Transport 3 had recognized him, with the same gold morning light coming under the same clouds, and the same city filling the same low place the way water does. I wore no crown. Elias wore no finery. He still limped, and the gray was still in his hair, and the scar still split his brow, and he stood beside me in front of 100,000 of my people exactly as, weathered and unglamorous and real as the day he had walked in out of the rain, and I would not have changed a single line of him. I said my true thing first because I am the queen and I go first into the hard places. That is the whole of the job. 9 years ago, I told my people, I tied a band of gray silk on my wrist and let you believe it was mourning, because a queen is not allowed to be seen hoping out loud. I lied to you for 9 years. I am done lying to you. I lifted my hand, where my mother's plain iron ring sat among no others. This is the ring my mother put on my cradle and gave to no one but me. I gave it to a human soldier on a wall the night before the Salegate, because I would have married him if the world had let me, and the world did not let me, and he carried it through 9 years of our enemy's dark and brought it home. I am not asking your leave. A queen does not ask leave to love. I am telling you the true thing the way the old rite asked, that this man is mine, that I have chosen him with my eyes open and my whole history known, and that whatever you answer, I will keep him beside me until I die. Then it was his turn, and the careful man, who had stood by the door of my hall trying to be small, stood in the center of the square in front of a whole world and did not try to be small at all. I'm not from here, Elias said. Most of you weren't born, or were too young to remember, the last time I stood on your ground, and I was on a mountain that night, not in a square, and the only light on me was a signal fire I was feeding to keep a road lit. I have done a thing I'll never be clean of. I've spent 9 years as a number in an empire that wanted me dead by inches. I have nothing to offer your queen that a court would write down, no crown, no land, no blood that matches hers, no power at all, and I've asked that it stay that way in law forever. He paused, and his voice when it went on was rougher and steadier at once. But I'll tell you the true thing the old rite asks for. For 9 years in the cold and the dark and the quarry stone, the one thing that kept me walking was a name I said every night so I wouldn't forget what I was walking toward. I walked the whole dark to get back to her. I'd walk it again tomorrow. That's all I've got. It's hers. And it has been since a wall 9 years ago. And I'd like, if you'll let me, to spend whatever's left of me standing beside her, not over you, not above her, just there. That's the whole of what I'm asking. That's the true thing. The old rite asks the people to answer. There is no fixed word for it. Among the Theranai, the people answer a chosen joining however the moment moves them, and most often it is a low murmur, a settling, the sound of a crowd consenting. That is not what my people did. The woman from Transport 3 was near the front again, with her son Beacon on her hip, and it was she who answered first, and she did not murmur. She lifted her free hand in the cairn gesture, the sign for the honored dead, and then deliberately, she turned it over, palm up, open, which is a sign we do not have a name for because no one had ever thought to make it before. The cairn gesture inverted, grief turned over into welcome, the sign for the dead who came back, and she said one word, and the word ran out across the square the way the recognition had run a month before. One voice, and then 1,000, and then 100,000, every open hand lifted and turned over toward the human in the center of the square. The word was the one we say to a soldier returning from a long campaign, to a ship that was overdue and feared lost, to a child found after a famine. It is the oldest word of welcome the Ther and I have, and we had not had cause to say it to the dead before, and my people invented the saying of it to the dead that morning all at once, for him. Home, they said, 100,000 of them, home, home, welcome home. Elias Marr stood in the middle of it, the man who had counted 4 ships on a burning bridge and crossed an empire on a name and refused a crown in front of the senior houses, and he turned slowly in the square to look at all of them, at the open hands and the lifted children and the whole impossible living world he had bought with the worst night of his life. And then he turned. Last to me, the queen who had worn her hope as grief for 9 years, and the steadiness finally fully left his face, and what was under it was not a soldier's and not a slave's. It was just a man's, come home at last. I did not press my brow to his. I have never cared for the easy gestures. Instead, I took my mother's iron ring off my own hand, the ring that had been on a cradle and on a wall, and through 9 years of an enemy's dark, and home to me and onto my finger as a vow. And I took his scarred left hand, the one that had held the torch, and I put the ring back where I had first placed it 9 years ago, on the hand of the human I would have married if the world had let me. The world had finally let me. I closed his fingers over it. You brought it home, I said, only for him, under the great rolling word of the city. Now keep it here. That's the only order your queen will ever give you, Elias Marr. Stay home, as long as I'm breathing, he said. And below the gallery, my people went on saying the word they had made new that morning, the welcome we had only ever said to the living, given now to a man who had been dead 9 years and walked the whole dark back. And I stood in the gold light beside the human who held the gate, with his hand in mine and my mother's ring between us. And for the first time since a wall 9 years ago, I let my own face fall all the way down in front of my whole court, and I did not care, because a queen is allowed to weep at a homecoming, especially her own.